Okay, members of council and viewing audience on YouTube, welcome to tonight's meeting. We'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with a moment of silent reflection, and then we'll stand for O Canada. Thank you. Members of council, any disclosures of conflict of interest for items on the agenda? So noted. Adoption minutes of meeting closed and regular meeting held August 10th, 21 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Desjardins, seconded by Councillor Akpata. All in favor? That carries. Krista Malash, I'm assuming you're in favor. We can't see you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor's comments. I have a couple. I'll start with Mr. Reno is not available to attend tonight's meeting. He's on a well-deserved vacation with his family. And I took part in an announcement on August 13th with Ira Kuzmerchuk, MP for Windsor-Tecumseh. We were successful in a grant application in the amount of $750,000 from the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. These funds will be used for construction and upgrades to the former Westport Marina building, which is being transformed into an event center on our waterfront. We hope to see you at the LaSalle Night Market this Sunday, August 29th. Join us at LaSalle Civic Center between 4 and 8. Last event last month was well attended, so hope we'll have good weather for the Sunday's event. We congratulate Community Living Essex County on their 60th anniversary. Thank you for making a difference in our community. And I believe our own Sue Desjardins is now the sitting president.
Yes.
Thank you, Sue, for volunteering your time. I'm sure it's a high-paying job.
Oh yeah, really.
Access to COVID-19 vaccine is easier than ever. As we see case counts climbing in our region, now's the time to get your vaccine. Reduce your risk of COVID-19 and its variants. For information, visit wevax.ca. Okay, with that, we have no presentations. We have delegations in relation to our new comprehensive zoning bylaw. So tonight's agenda, we're going to start with Mr. Solani, then Mr. Palmer, and then Mr. Solani, and then we'll hear from the delegates. Mr. Solani, please.
Good evening, Mayor Bondi and members of council. Town planning staff and our consultant, Ron Palmer, have prepared a report that's part of the council agenda. It summarizes the requested changes and concerns that have been received pertaining to the May 2021 draft new comprehensive zoning bylaw. This report also provides a response to each of these requests and comments, and it also makes recommended changes to be included in the final revised comprehensive zoning bylaw that staff and our consultant are recommending be adopted by council. That bylaw, the revised bylaw, is part of the agenda as well. All of this is being done in keeping with the council directive that we received at the June 29th council meeting. And it's important to remember that the new comprehensive zoning bylaw must conform to the town's approved official plan. And it also must be consistent with the policies that are contained in the provincial policy statement. That is mandated by the province in the Planning Act. At this time, I'm going to ask Ron Palmer to go over the requested changes and our recommendations to make the revisions to the bylaw. Following that, I will then explain what happens next. And as Mayor Bondi indicated, at that point, we would open it up to members of council and to the registered delegates to ask questions and make any comments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Larry.
Mr. Palmer.
I'm ready to roll here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint to show up on the screen. There it is. We can move on to the next slide. That's just the cover slide. It's important to talk a little bit about the process. This new bylaw and the background report that went with it were posted on the town's website back on May 12th. There was notice of that posting in the Windsor Star on May 14th. And after that time, the document was available for review comment. We did hold 2 virtual public meetings that were special planning advisory committee meetings, one on May 27th and one on June 10th. And then following that, we had a council statutory public meeting on June 29th. As Larry mentioned, tonight's meeting is to present a report and recommendations coming out of the direction from the June 29th meeting and to allow council the opportunity to adopt the final draft new comprehensive zoning bylaw as it has been revised based on some of the comments and concerns that we heard. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through in a very summary way the requested concerns, changes, comments on the draft zoning bylaw. We've at the top of the slide, we've identified the person who made the request. Then there's a bit of a description of what the request was and then what we've done about it. There is substantially more detail in the matrix that is attached to the staff report. But nonetheless, I will go through this relatively quickly. The first request was a request to be removed from the deferred urban zone to the mixed use 1 zone for a specific area of lands that are vacant on the north side of Leptis Magna Drive. In conversation with staff, it was determined that it would be appropriate to make a change to maps 21 and 22 and to zone these lands MU1 with a holding provision subject to servicing availability and some design work. Next slide, please. The next one was a concern that an entire secondary plan would be required as a result of the zoning bylaw, keeping in mind that this person's lands were also in the deferred urban zone. And the zoning bylaw itself does not require a secondary plan. However, for this area, as well as a number of other greenfield areas where there are multiple landowners, multiple land parcels, the town may require a secondary plan prior to accepting individual draft plans and rezoning applications. This is to ensure that sufficient servicing and municipal infrastructure is available concurrent with the approval of further development applications. Next slide. This was a conversation that we had about clarification about permitted uses and definitions. There was some concern that currently permitted uses were being left out. What we explained was that the terminology throughout the zoning bylaw has changed, And many of the uses that were previously permitted in these zones are now included in new definitions that are a little more comprehensive. The second concern was about accessory uses, and in retrospect, reviewing the zoning bylaw, there was a slight adjustment to the terminology around accessory uses, which has been implemented. And there was also a request that a hotel use be permitted in the MU2 zone. And we have included that in the MU2 zone, provided that there is conformity with the built form regulations and that it's a complementary and beneficial use. Next slide. This landowner was also concerned about the deferred urban zone, wanted low density residential. This is about a 130-acre parcel of land east of Front and south of Gary Avenue. When we looked into this request, approximately a third of the property is ecologically significant and cannot be developed for urban purposes. There needs to be a full study of the natural heritage features on this property to determine what the exact limits of those features are. And then the corollary would be true, what can be developed on these lands. These lands are also affected by the Marin-Tet drain, and there is no stormwater management solution for the developable portions on this land. And that work would need to be identified as part of a municipal class environmental study. So we understand that the future rezonings of these lands would require and permit residential, recreational, natural zone categories, but that can't be determined until that Class EA study is completed and actual applications for draft plans of subdivision are submitted. So as a result, we have made no change on the basis of this, this request. Next slide. In reviewing the document, we did get a request that we look at the requirements for indoor bicycle parking in new residential multi-unit buildings. And we agreed with the requester that it should be reduced to 0.5 of an indoor space per unit, keeping in mind that outdoor bicycle parking spaces will also be provided. Next slide. One of the most biggest concerns that we heard throughout the public meetings was related to some developments along the Malden Road corridor. And I've listed the people that spoke to this issue, and I've summarized their concerns about safety, privacy, parking, and concerns about the interface with new development abutting existing residential development. Next slide. So I've, in conversations with staff, we have made some recommended changes to the zoning bylaw. We have included the requirement for the angular plane wherever a lot line abuts an R1 or R2 lot. And this will enhance the transition from the existing residential uses to any new proposed development. We've reduced the building height slightly to 10.5 meters, which is a 3-story built form. And this is the same height that is permitted in those R1 and R2 zones. We've also required a 3-meter wide landscape planting strip where any proposed building is greater than 1 story and where the lot line, or the rear lot line, abuts a lot that is zoned R1 or R2. So we've made a few changes to the provisions of the bylaw to help improve the interface between new development along the Malden Road corridor and to adjacent and abutting existing residential uses in the R1 or R2 zone. There was a concern about parking, and in the zoning bylaw, the parking requirements for any particular form of development, mixed use single use, whatever it is, the parking requirements are identified in the general provisions section, section 317, and all parking required will be applied to each individual development depending on the mix of uses that are proposed. There was a lot of discussion about the future of Malden Road itself. What we have told everyone so far is that there is an ongoing transportation study, an environmental assessment, and the purpose of that environmental assessment is to determine what the future of Malden Road looks like, what its profile is, how many lanes it is, where traffic lights and other improvements may be necessary to ensure that traffic is appropriately accommodated and safety is certainly considered in that. Next slide. This landowner was concerned that in and around their properties that developers would be permitted to build new multi-unit buildings in and around their homes. And they felt that anything more than 3 stories would be too much. They were also concerned about getting notice of any future development applications submitted to the town. So it is true that in and around these properties, including these properties, the height limit is 21 meters or less, and there is a requirement for the application of the angular plane for any lands that abut an R1, R2, or R3 zoned property. And for sure, whenever a draft plan of subdivision, draft plan of condominium, consent, minor variance, or rezoning application for any abutting property is received by the town, these landowners will receive notice for public hearings so they can have a say about what happens on those properties. Next slide. Similarly, the same area on Orford Street, a number of questions were raised, and it is understood that there are a number of developers attempting to assemble properties in this neighborhood, but the town is not aware of any formal development applications that are ongoing. Again, the height of new development in the Town Center 2 zone is 21 meters, or as that may be reduced by the application of the angular plane to properties that are zoned R1, R2, or R3. Certainly any concerns about traffic are intended to be dealt with. Each application for development will be required to prepare and submit a traffic engineering report to address the capacity of the road network and any required improvements to the transportation network. The last concern was about why developers are allowed to acquire homes. And certainly this one, the town has no authority to control the sale or purchase of private property. And it's not something that the town is ever involved in terms of the development review process. Next slide. There was a very specific request about wineries within the agricultural zone. And in our review of the zoning bylaw and in the OP, it was pretty important that the planning instruments allowed the agricultural community to be successful and to be part of the local economy. In review of the request, certainly growing grapes or any kind of fruit for winemaking is a permitted agricultural use. And I know it's a bit complicated, but the definitions around agriculture have been changed over time by the provincial government. And we get phrases like on-farm diversified use, and an on-farm diversified use would include a winery. So we don't believe that there is a need to change the zoning bylaw to specifically permit a winery, because we believe that it is permitted under the definition of an on-farm diversified use. This one was a concern about development potential on their property. They were noticing that there was some development going on in and around their property. There was a general concern about lodging houses and, of course, traffic congestion around the LaSalle Town Center. This particular property is located outside the urban area boundary and is designated rural agricultural in the town's official plan, and it is being included in the agricultural zone category. So permitted uses are those that are permitted in the agricultural zone category. With respect to the new homes in the vicinity, those were developed on existing lots of record. Those lots all have frontage onto a public street, and those lots all had access to appropriate municipal services. So they were developable. With respect to the lodging house issue, this was a really important part of our work on behalf of the town. And it's really important to know that the municipality can't control the occupancy or tenure of a dwelling unit anywhere in the town under the Planning Act. So the approach that we've taken here in your new zoning bylaw relates primarily to a licensing program under the Municipal Act to help manage those uses. The key link between the Municipal Act and the Planning Act is that in order to implement a licensing program, you have to permit the use. And in this case, we've permitted it in just a couple of zones with the qualifying regulations of the bylaw. And of course, the traffic congestion issue is the town is carrying out that environmental assessment on Malden Road. Next slide. This next one concerned 14 lots located off Valiant Street, and they wanted some basis for the decisions that we were making on these lands through the zoning bylaw. These are lots that are located on old registered plans of subdivision, and this is an interesting element of the town of LaSalle, but they have no frontage onto publicly owned roads or maintained streets. They lack municipal infrastructure, and all of the lands in this area are being placed in the deferred urban zone. Importantly, the town has commenced a master drainage study for the Bouffard-Howard area to try to identify a solution for stormwater management. Once that study is complete, these landowners, as well as others, will be invited to meet with staff and to discuss how they may move forward with the development of their properties. It was determined that at this point in time, it's premature to zone any of these lands for urban purposes, and that is the purpose of the deferred urban zone. Next slide. This one was a formal objection to the bylaw related to a specific property at 6306 Malden Road. The front portion of this property is being zoned MU2 with a hold provision, which is in keeping with the official plan for lands fronting onto Malden Road. The majority of the property, however, is zoned in that deferred urban zone in recognition, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's premature to zone these for urban development until municipal infrastructure and natural feature elements have been identified and secured. And again, the town has commenced part of that work. And the town, once that is done, will meet with these landowners to discuss the approach to development going forward. Next slide. This slide talks about a property at the corner of Front and Malden, and it requests a rezoning from the current zoning to commercial. It's important to note that this vacant site has been zoned agriculture in the town's existing bylaw for about 20 years, and it's being zoned rural residential in the new draft zoning bylaw, which is what is the zoning on a number of the adjacent properties. If the owner wants to pursue commercial zoning, an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment applications can be submitted to the town at any time. And that would include requirements for justification and technical reports to make sure that the proposed development is appropriate for the site. Now, the second last slide I have is that, and I know this is assigned to one person, but there were others throughout the process that were concerned about the public process and the communications from the town. Certainly, the town has sent out notices starting in May of this year through the newspaper, through electronic newsletters, news releases, public information sessions, and email blasts. And it's suggested by me and supported by the town that you've met all the Planning Act requirements with respect to public notification and gone well beyond what the province typically mandates by way of public notice and holding public meetings prior to what council would do before they adopt a new zoning bylaw. The last slide I have is that we have prepared a final draft of the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and it includes all of the recommendations that I've mentioned to you this evening. Following adoption by council, and I'm going to let Larry jump in right after this, but it's a requirement that notice of adoption be sent to all of the appropriate regulatory agencies and to anyone, any member of the public that may have requested to receive a copy of the notice of adoption from the clerk's office. And Larry, I'm going to turn it back to you to finish that up.
With your permission, Mayor Bondi, I just want to make a couple of comments on the process going forward. As Mr. Palmer indicated, the next step of the process is for council to consider the final draft of the new zoning bylaw for adoption purposes under Section 34 of the Planning Act. Your staff, your professional planning staff, and our professional planning consultant are recommending that it be adopted by council as revised. So a number of revisions have been made to address the concerns and the requests that have been submitted to the town. Mr. Palmer went over those, and there's much more detail in the matrix that's part of the staff report. So once the bylaw is adopted by council, then that's the point in time where the Planning Act has a very specific legal process. So under the provisions of the Planning Act, notification of adoption is sent out to mandatory agencies, the county, the Conservation Authority, and other bodies. And also it's sent out to those that have requested to receive notice of adoption. It also provides, the Planning Act provides for an appeal period. So individuals who are not satisfied with a specific item in the zoning bylaw have the ability under the Planning Act within that appeal period to file an appeal with the clerk's office. As part of that appeal, the individual or corporation must submit that in writing again to the clerk's office, and there's a fee. The LPAT, the used to be the Ontario Municipal Board, it's the Planning Act Tribunal. They prescribe a fee that must accompany those formal appeals, and they must provide the planning reasons for filing that objection. So you have to be very specific as to what provision you're objecting to. And you have to put in writing why, what are your reasons for that objection that are planning in nature. If there are no appeals to the bylaw, once it's adopted, following the appeal period, it comes into effect. And if there is an appeal that is filed, there's a legal process that the Planning Act sets out for how those appeals are resolved. So the LPAT provides a process for how those things are resolved, up to and including holding hearings where witnesses, professional witnesses are appearing on behalf of each of the parties, and solicitors are retained and so forth as part of the appeal process. So that is the next step of the process in terms of adoption, and then what happens after adoption. So with that, your worship and members of council, staff and our consultant are finished with our comments and our presentation as set out in our staff report, and we're available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Salami and Mr. Palmer. A lot of work went into this, and it's nice that you followed Section 34 of the Planning Act and you addressed concerns. That's not always the way things happen, but it's nice to see that you did try to accommodate the concerns that were raised to residents. I know we can't deal with selling of private homes. That's beyond our scope, but it's nice to see that you did accommodate where you could. So I will open it up now to, do we have council questions, or are you okay if we go to the delegates first? Councillor Carrick.
Thank you. You know what? I'll wait till.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Valente, Peter Valente, are you here?
He does not appear to be here, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mara. You can see more than I can on my screen. Thank you. Okay, next on the list, I have Kelly Smith.
Kelly's not there, but this is her husband, Andrew.
Okay, Andrew, you have the floor, and just a friendly reminder, you have 5 minutes.
No problem. Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
I think it's great that all those provisions and elements were addressed. It really shows that the town is listening, so we appreciate that. Just a clarification on the element that asked about vision angle, the angular provision, I think is the first item that was mentioned for abutting areas or zones to R1, R2. Was it, is there a specific angle?
Your worship, I believe Mr. Palmer can give a brief explanation. There's an illustration right in the bylaws, so where because it's a technical calculation, so there is an illustration that provides how that is calculated. But Mr. Palmer can summarize that.
Yeah,
No,
it's 45 degrees.
Okay.
From a point on the property line.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then the other one was, my only other concern is that I know we talked about the roadway, and that's a separate study that's being done. Is there any consideration to how close the buildings are being placed to the sidewalk and what that will do to the current safety, like the current roadway? Meaning if we're able to have our line of sight impinged upon, meaning it's already tough to make left and right hand turns out of, depending on your perspective, of course, which way you're going, predominantly left. But when we're exiting the side streets onto Malden, having buildings so close to the sidewalk, that's my other area of concern.
Okay. Your worship, I can answer that, and Mr. Mara can probably jump in from the engineering point of view as well. But we will require daylight corners. So as part of any development or redevelopment application on Malden Road, there'll be individual site plans that come in for approval, and there will be daylight corners that will be taken at each of those intersections where an intersecting street comes out onto Malden Road. There will be appropriate setback for visibility purposes that no building can locate. And it's not just buildings, it would be fences, it would be shrubs, landscaping, signage. All of those things are taken into account to make sure that there is proper visibility at the intersections.
Very good, thank you. And then my last item is with the other areas that are being developed along Laurier, is it a consideration perhaps to focus on those areas to bring the residents from those areas to those areas to have their, can I say, purchasing and storefronts, so it avoids the traffic down Malden?
Again, Your Worship, I'll start with that. And again, Mr. Mara can add if he wishes to do so. The town has done the transportation master plan. Part of that exercise is to divert as much traffic as possible off of Malden Road. So there are a number of roads. Sandwich West Parkway, Ream is one of the ones that's identified as a priority to take traffic easterly in an east-west manner, similar to what Normandy did. At one time, we only had Todd Lane, and once Normandy was opened up east-west, it made a considerable difference. And Laurier performs the same function to take as much traffic from the Greenfield area will be directed to go through Laurier east-west and then up the various north-south like Howard Avenue and Huron Line and so forth to make their way around the community. There's also new collector roads that are being planned as part of the transportation plan for that whole Greenfield area to the east of Malden Road. So you'll notice when you read the transportation master plan, it's based on the fact that we are looking as the community grows and evolves over time is to divert traffic away from Malden Road as much as possible.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. The
Mr.
only other
Mara,
request, last one.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Mara, do you have something to add to that?
Sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, transportation and moving traffic is very important for the aspect of the town's growth. Moving traffic off of Malden Road is somewhat difficult as it is one of the main arterial roads, and it already has a number of major commercial nodes that service a lot of the population of the town of LaSalle. Certainly, an integrated network, as identified by Mr. Solani through the transportation master plan, is the key to keeping traffic moving through the system. Certainly, Malden Road, through the environmental assessment, does take into account future growth, future road connections, and the proposed recommendations do take all of that into consideration. They also do roadside safety audits through the or safety reviews through the environmental assessment as well, which looks at what is permitted use along the corridor. So offsets and building faces and things of that nature is all looked at as part of the environmental assessment. Again, the official plan is high level. A lot of the zoning bylaw becomes a little bit closer down to the ground. And as we get into an environmental assessment, we really drill into a lot of the fine details with respect to the transportation network. So certainly Malden Road, again, when we bring that forward to council for final adoption, you'll see some of that information as part of that formal review. And certainly the aspects of adding all the other roads within the system, Sandwich West Parkway as Sandwich West Parkway Ream extension, Laurier expansion, and all of those other roads through the system does help to move traffic and alleviate pressures on Malden. But certainly Malden Road is a major arterial road within the town, and it will always remain an arterial road from that aspect.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I appreciate everything that the team is doing to make this new plan. Much appreciated.
Okay, any more questions, Mr. Smith?
No, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Then we have Diane and Greg Brown.
Hi.
Hi.
My first question was actually already addressed by Mr. Palmer, and I would very much like to thank Mr. Palmer for speaking so clearly and plainly at the bylaw meetings, and also to Ellen Burgess and Larry Solani. It just makes things a little bit easier for us common folk to understand what it is that you do. Because we don't necessarily know in detail what will be presented at council. So our prepared speeches might sound a little bit repetitive, but if you could be patient, that would be great.
That's fine, yes.
Okay, one question that we had was, because there's going to be a limited height on these buildings, will it just be the building equipment that will be allowed on top of the buildings and not advertising or anything else? Maybe the odd reindeer, but like not advertising to extend the height of it.
Mr. Solani?
Can answer that. billboards and advertising is not permitted on rooftops.
Oh, awesome. The only other thing, like with reference to the job that the town has been doing to try and get the messages out, there is the digital sign that's at the town hall. Is it possible to perhaps, for those people who don't use that way to go about their daily work, is it possible to put a digital sign maybe at the Valmer or another location to get more access? Just a thought. Okay. Another question I had was, I think there was something about a garage possibly built in the town center to accommodate any extra parking. Is that still a possibility?
Mr. Solani?
Like a multi-use, like a multi-story building? If there's more business.
Yeah, Your Worship, again, at this point in time, there are no plans by the town to build a parking structure in the town center. Certainly over time, over the next 10, 15, 20 years, as the area continues to grow and the population grows, like other, growing urban centers, there's always the possibility that, those types of structures, multi-story structures can be built to replace surface parking. But at this point in time, there is not a need for that. But again, that's something that can always be revisited by the town and landowners in that area in the future as demand warrants.
Yeah, it might relieve some of the problems on the side streets was the only reason I was thinking of that. And also, like, with the upcoming increase in commercial businesses that you're looking forward to, will the EA that's being conducted also speak to truck traffic coming down Malden?
The EA, the transportation work that's being done, the traffic analysis takes into account all vehicles. So it's looking at not just cars, but it's looking at buses, trucks, people riding bikes, people walking. So the purpose of the transportation plan and the EA looks at very comprehensive at all types of vehicles.
Okay. When I spoke at one of the last meetings, I had started to bring up a subject regarding the police, and Mr. Bondi advised me what their mission statement was educational awareness and enforcement. But basically what I was trying to ask was, with the increase of population, is council looking at increasing budgets to accommodate policing, fire, EMS, that sort of thing?
I can answer that. The short answer is we have increased our fire budget dramatically with a new number of firefighters. I can say that Chief Davies has put out an ad to hire new constables. If you want to add to that, Chief Davies, that's up to you. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes.
Oh, okay. Because, like, they're not just for policing issues that are standard, like chasing down people, that sort of thing, because we've used the police department for just sundry things. Like, we didn't know how to sell a car safely, and I called and spoke with an officer who advised us on how to do that. That was just a everyday sort of thing that, kind of out of the norm. And, we've called about some vehicles with no headlights going down our street at 3 a.m., which turned into be a problem, I understand. And, even as far as turning something into going somewhere where you can turn an item in and then the police will carry that. So we're very aware of the what the police do and whatnot, but it's just making sure that budgets are there for, the safety of everybody. And as far as, a thing about complaints, to me, like, I'm a retired nurse. Believe me, I've heard a lot of complaints, and they're not always complaints, but they're usually an opportunity to be educated and given facts. And And people are generally worried when it sounds like a complaint, but it's not. We're worried about stuff. We love LaSalle and we just want to make it safe for everybody. So anyway, that's my shortened version this time. So thank you very much to everybody who's involved.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. And we want to make everybody feel safe, and they do. And we are officially the third safest community in Canada. So
Very commendable.
yes. Well, we need the help of the community like yourself. If you call in with people with no headlights, that could lead to other issues. So thanks for being cooperative with our police department.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, we have Mr. Klingbeil.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Klingbeil is not in the Zoom meeting.
Okay. So we'll wrap this up. Mr. Palmer, closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's always been a pleasure of mine to work with the town of LaSalle and with your great planning staff. And this project was no different. I've been working with you folks for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and it's been wonderful. I'm just sad I don't get to come down there for the meetings.
I'm sure Mr. Solani and his great team, as you call them, would love to have you down here. And we always call it Team LaSalle because everybody we have is great. They cooperate, and it's all for the betterment of the residents. So, okay, thank you. Now I'll open it to Mark Carrick, Councillor Carrick, sorry.
That's okay, as long as you're calling me, I'm happy. The first of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the residents for coming forward, for stepping up. This has been a public process, and they've had some great input. And it's forced our Mr. Palmer and Mr. Solani and the team to really come forward and done a great job, as they always do. But it always continues and it looks great. And we have great administration. And thank you, Mr. Palmer, for steering the ship and coming forward with us.
My
I
pleasure.
just have one thing I need clarification on, if I can. And forgive me, but during your presentation, I think it was back about 9 slides from the back to the front. If we could bring up that presentation again, I just needed some clarification on the one line of comment. I believe it was either 3 or 4 in or from the back. It was regarding the development on Malden Road, around the, I think the old Michigan Tavern site, some section about 9 slides back. From the back, from the beginning, or from the front 3 or 4. Sorry about that. I should have wrote it down, but I was just trying to count them back. But okay. Nope. 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 Okay, here is, I think it might be the next one. Okay, so significant. Anyways, it said the development along Malden Road in regards to, I don't see it here. Is that going to hold up development, having to wait for the EA along Malden Road for once we pass this bylaw, the zoning bylaw?
So Councillor Carrick, through you, Mayor Bondi, the way we presented the information is that the EA is going to be presented to council very shortly, and it will contain information with respect to what is the ultimate work that has to be done. And through discussions with Mr. Mara and with Stantec, there'll also be some discussions about phasing, and that will be conditional upon, obviously, budgetary dollars being allocated to do the work in that area. In the interim, if somebody comes forward for development, depending on the scale of the development, if it's small scale and the existing infrastructure can be improved around that site in terms of safety for pedestrians and cyclists and motorists, it may be able to, proceed if it's small in scale. If it's something larger that has bigger impacts and requires more infrastructure, it may have to be put on hold until a particular phase of development of the EA in terms of the corridor goes further. So it's really going to depend on the nature of what comes forward along that corridor to determine whether or not it can proceed with some interim work being done, or whether it has to wait for a larger phase of the Malden Road reconstruction.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Thank you very much and great job.
Councillor Akpata.
Thank you, Your Worship. To the team, again, I echo the sentiments of Councillor Carrick. I have one question that came up in the presentation, and that is when we spoke about wineries, does that include and just because I'm curious, does that include the facility itself and retail space associated with the winery, or simply the fact that they're able to produce the product in that zone?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's an excellent question. The definitions of permitted uses in the agricultural zone are pretty broad, and they typically include opportunities for the sale of goods that are produced on the site. And that may go as far as wine tastings and tours and a retail element.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That's all I was looking for.
Thank you, Councillor Akpata. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Malash, I can't see you, but do you have any questions?
No, Mayor, thank you very much. I really enjoyed actually the process that we went through over the last few months. It was very informative, and seeing today's final report, I think helps to realize a lot of the requests that our residents had put forward at those meetings. And I think it's a great plan going forward. So thank you very much to all the team.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Okay, council's pleasure, the recommendations that the report be received and council adopt the final draft of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw as revised and repeal bylaw 5050, the existing comprehensive zoning bylaw. Moved by Councillor Nicho Spagnuolo, support by Councillor Desjardins. All in favor? Deputy Mayor Malash.
I'm in favor.
In favor. That carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Palmer, for your work. Mr. Solani.
Thank you very much.
Great job as always. Okay, item E1, 2022 budget and departmental business plan. Is that Mr. Ferraro?
Yes.
There he is.
Good evening, Mayor Bondi and members of council. The report before you outlines the 2022 budget and business plan timelines. These timelines are consistent with previous years and previous budgets. And I'd like to highlight that an informational briefing will occur in late November, and the proposed budget deliberations would be in the middle of December, similar to the previous years. And again, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Council questions? Council's pleasure. Motion received, Councillor Desjardins, support Councillor Akpata, all in favor. That carries.
In
Thank
favor.
you. Deputy Mayor Malash, I'll assume you're in favor unless I hear otherwise.
Thank you.
Okay. Land acknowledgement. There she is, Linda Jean.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Bondi and members of council. The report before you speaks to establishing a land acknowledgement for the town of LaSalle. A land acknowledgement is a way to recognize past Indigenous usage of lands and is an act of reconciliation. And as you can see, universities, colleges, many of our neighboring municipalities have gone forward with establishing a land acknowledgement right now. I did consult with 2 individuals from the Caldwell's First Nations, and in working with them, we established the land acknowledgement statement as outlined in the report before you. And also to ensure that this acknowledgement represents the town, I did contact representatives from both the Can-Am Indian Friendship Center and the Aboriginal Education Center at the University of Windsor, and approval was received from both parties. If this is approved, we will be, the land acknowledgement will be presented at the beginning of each council meeting, after the moment of silence and before the O Canada. And if you have any other questions, I'm available for answers.
Council questions, comments? Council's pleasure. Moved by Councillor Akpata and Councillor Licio Spagnolo. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Jean. Development and Strategic Initiatives request for extension dated June 22nd, 2021. Mr. Burgess.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. A request has been presented for an extension of the approval of draft plan of subdivision by Mr. Frank Fazio on behalf of the Grillo family. Staff have reviewed the request, and we are recommending a further 3-year extension at this time. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Council questions? Council pleasure. Moved by Councillor Carrick. Or you have a question, Councillor Carrick? No? Okay. Moved by Councillor Carrick, support by Councillor Licio Spagnolo. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. New item, award of demolition contracts. 1010 Front Road, 6885 Malden Road, and 2920 Bouffard. There it is, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Got a tender that was released for the demolition of 3 dwellings. One is on Front Road. It's the last of the 9 structures that are being demolished to make way for the redevelopment of the park. Also includes a dwelling at the corner of Laurier and Malden Road, which was purchased for the future road improvements in that area. And the third is the dwelling on Bouffard Road, which was purchased for the enlargement of the drain project in that area, in the Howard Bouffard area. The results of the tender are in front of you in the report. It's recommended that the low tender Jones Group Limited be awarded. They were low in all 3 categories, that it go to them. I anticipate that the work would probably start immediately following Labor Day. And I believe that the tender deadline is sometime around mid-October, when we should have all 3 dwellings down. We do have the event center that's under current construction. So we'll make sure that there's adequate separation between those 2 job sites when that demolition occurs. I expect we'll be working with the developer. I expect we'll start on Front Road and then work towards Malden and over to Bouffard. I'm available, Your Worship, if any member of council has any questions.
Council questions? Seeing none. Councillor Desjardins.
Move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Desjardins, support Councillor Akpata. On the motion, I just have a comment before we vote. It's substantially less by the Jones Group. I mean, it's a big savings when you add up the totals. They're half price other than the other 3. So well done. Save money for our residents. Thank you, Mr. Miller. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Summary of reports to council.
Move them.
Moved by Councillor Carrick, support Councillor Akpata. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Bylaws. We have 8 bylaws, and we added that last one for the bylaw or the demolition contract 8606. All 3 readings. Moved by Councillor Desjardins, support by Councillor Licio Spagnolo. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Council questions. Councillor Akpata.
Thank you, Your Worship. One question that maybe LaSalle Fire could answer if it's in their purview, sir. I've been made aware of some of the constriction that's taken place with our frontline support workers, hospital things of that's happened during COVID. I can only imagine the stress and strain that has been placed on EMS and paramedic services. And just to ask a question, has there been any change in EMS distribution with COVID? And if so, will we be able to better understand how the safety of the community is being taken care of with our EMS partners?
I don't know who wants to take that because EMS is done through the county, but
If that's the case, then your worship, perhaps I could ask that that be directed to the appropriate person in the county if it's beyond the purview of the municipality. Again, just wanted to make sure that we have the right resources to keep our folks safe, and just concerned about hearing about the number of nurses and frontline healthcare workers that are stepping away because of burnout or simple tiredness of dealing with COVID. I've got to believe that it's affecting the EMS fleet and those personnel as well.
I can't answer that. I can tell you Mr. Mara, you have information in relation to that?
Mr. Mayor, may I suggest what Councilor Capata was suggesting is maybe we can follow up with a question to the county on that particular instance, and certainly we can provide a summary report to back to council on that.
I'm sure Chief Crowder would be more than willing to give over some information in relation to that. Councilor Dicho, thank you for the question, Councilor Capata.
Thank you, sir.
Councilor Dicho Spagnolo.
This is just to piggyback on Councilor Akpata's question.
Okay.
So I have a little information on that. I'm part of the First Responders Coalition with Canadian Mental Health Association. So we do deal with all our first responders, including our fire chief here in LaSalle and Sergeant Woods. So we do have a lot of information, compassion fatigue, R2MR training, a lot of different training for our first responders out in the community. We had a meeting last week with Chief Crowder, and there is a lot of burnout with our first responders and our frontline staff, of course. So we do offer a lot of therapy sessions going into the hospitals, going into the workplaces, as well as a lot of trainings, because we are aware of the burnout that they are facing right now. So I just wanted to just touch on that just briefly, but of course get the other answers from Chief Crowder or whoever you feel necessary, but I just wanted to give a little bit of input on that. Thank you.
I think we all know they're burnt out. I know one of my family members is an ER nurse, and they do get burnt out because it's not sure if your shift is 7 to 7, you don't leave at 7 o'clock. When you're in the middle of an emergency, you're doing things, and the offload delays has been critical. There were some days there was I believe I found out through Chief Crowder, there were 6-hour delays, and it's just, that's not EMS's fault. It's the overload in the hospitals. Hence, we want everybody to get vaccinated so you don't have to make a visit there, please. Okay, any other council questions? Councilor Akpata.
Another one for you, your worship.
Sure.
A question. I was contacted by a resident, and this goes back, we had discussed a bylaw as hunting season's approaching. And I know that due to transition that the individual who's assigned to do it has since left, having retired. I was just wondering is it possible to find out where we stand with that council request of previous before hunting season comes in, sir?
It's been addressed and the people involved are on vacation and they'll be looked at next week.
Thank you, your worship. That's it for questions.
Thanks for the question that I already knew the answer to. I like those. Those are easy.
I appreciate that, your worship. It's always nice when you have the answers. That's what we expect from you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Chief Davies is on the line and he informed me that people involved will be looking at it when they return from vacation. Okay, reports from committees. Notices of motion. Confirmatory bylaw, first reading. Councillor Desjardins and Councillor Dicho Spagnolo, all in favor? That carries. Second reading, Councillor Carrick, Councillor Akpata, all in favor, that carries. Third and final reading, we have Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Carrick, all in favor, that carries. Looks like that's it. Thank you, members of council, viewing audience on YouTube.